Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, whoever you are joining us from around the world. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to today's International Occupational Hygiene Association webinar that is titled Beryllium. Haven't we been here before? My name is Jignesh, and I am the member of IOHA Education and Training Committee. I work professionally as a regional EHS manager and based out of Thailand. It is my truly honor to moderate today's session and to welcome such a diverse and highly experienced global audience of occupational hygiene and allied professionals. Before we begin, just a few brief housekeeping items to ensure that we have a smooth and engaging session for everyone. Just for you all know, this webinar is being recorded. So most part, your camera and microphone will remain off throughout this presentation. We have intentionally reserved ample time for question and answer so that you can raise your queries and we will have some time to do the Q&A. So please use the Q&A section or the comment chat box to raise all your question, and then at the end of the session we will have time to do the Q&A. So once again, we are delighted to have you with us today and very much look forward to an insightful discussion, thoughtful exchange, and the shared learning. Just before we begin, I also would like to have a very brief introduction about IOHA. The IOHA, International Occupational Hygiene Association, is an umbrella organization that represents 43 member organizations worldwide. This collectively comprising more than 20,000 occupational hygiene and allied professionals. IOHA operates through several technical committees and communities of practice, all working to advance IOHA's vision of a safe and healthy working environment for everyone. These groups focus on emerging and long-standing occupational health challenges, advancing best practices through education, research, and global collaboration. If you are a member of IOHA affiliated organization and would like to contribute more or become, or you volunteer with us, we would like to hear from you. Likewise, if you are joining us from a country that does not have yet a professional occupational hygiene organization and would like IOHA support, please do reach out to us. You can reach out to us on www.ioha.net, and we encourage you to follow our IOHA page on LinkedIn as well, because we post a lot of new webinar and lot of new initiative information on our social media. Well, coming back to today's webinar, today's topic is both timely and thought-provoking. Beryllium is a hazard. Many of us will believe that we know it very well, but yet history continues to remind us that knowledge alone is not enough. As technologies evolve, applications expand, and work progress change, long-standing hazards can re-emerge in new and unexpected ways. This webinar will invite us not only to reflect on where we have been, but to critically examine whether we are applying those past lessons effectively and consistently in today's workplaces. To apply this topic, we are extremely fortunate to hear from the leadership team of Beryllium Health and Safety Committee, which is called as BHSC, who collectively bring decades of experience across industry, government, research, and consulting. The BHSC is dedicated to education, prevention, and the dissemination of best practices related to beryllium health and safety. Since its formal inception in 1995, the committee has played a pivotal role in improving understanding of exposure risk, advancing monitoring strategies, and promoting effective controls worldwide. With that all said, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Beth Walker. She is Vice Chair for BHSC. Beth is a founder of Safer Environment Limited and works as a full-time consultant. She's specializing in chemical and manufacturing industries. She has over a decade of experience in occupational health and safety with strong focus on respiratory and chemical hazards, including beryllium. Beth brings us a highly practical perspective grounded in real world applications of exposure assessments, controls, and worker protection. She will share insights into how beryllium risks are being managed today and where practitioners must remain vigilant. Our second speaker, Dr. Joseph Sobiaraj, is also a vice chair for BHSC. He currently works with National Nuclear Security Administration and has more than 30 years of experience as an interdisciplinary engineer and scientist across academia, government, and private sector. His career has spanned multiple countries, including Australia, Brazil, China, United Kingdom, and the United States. Joseph will bring a forward-looking perspective, including discussion on emerging technologies and novel beryllium applications, such as soluble beryllium molten salts that is used in fission and fusion operations, and what these developments mean for occupational hygiene as we are moving forward. With all that said, I welcome Joseph to please begin our webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jignesh and Retha. Now, can you all hear me? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we do.
Great, great. Well, thank you for inviting the Beryllium Health and Safety Committee to present today. Chris Dorn, who serves as our chair for BHSC, he sends his regards. Unfortunately, he is taking some much needed personal time with family, so cannot make it today. But Chris did let us know he can be accessible if anybody has questions in the future. But Beth and I, and Beth, as you mentioned, serves as vice chair. I serve as co-vice chair of BHSC. Beth and I are going to tag team, co-present this presentation for today. We're very excited to do so, and we're always excited to share what's going on in the world of beryllium. So I did access the International Occupational Hygiene Association, IOHA webpage, and was quite impressed to learn since your creation in 1987, you've grown. Now you said 43. When I accessed your webpage, it said 42, but that's amazing. 42 member organizations represent over 20,000 occupational hygienists worldwide. That's impressive in terms of its breadth and depth. I'm also pleased to share, and this you may or may not have been aware of, but the BHSC and IOHA established a formal memorandum of understanding in May 2021. So given that, so think about that year, 2021 those were the COVID years. So to my knowledge, today is the first opportunity where BHSC and IOHA get the opportunity to partner. But I assure you it won't be the last. As a little bit of a teaser, think CERN, think Switzerland, and we have a BHSC spring meeting, but Beth and I will talk about that a little bit later. The beryllium community is a tight community, and without knowing that Dr. Abbas Verji from NIOSH was a part of IOHA, we've already been partnering with Abbas for years, including his authoring a BHSC book chapter. He's presented at our most recent symposium, BHSC symposium in Las Vegas, Nevada, and he'll also be presenting, he and his NIOSH colleagues, at our spring meeting hosted at CERN. So truly, it's a small world, the beryllium world, and it's a tight community. But for today, Beth and I will chronicle some of the history and challenges of beryllium. We'll look at the developments, emerging technologies. Jignesh, you had already mentioned some of these soluble molten forms with fission and fusion reactors. So much going on there. So excited to share. And at the beginning of the presentation, we do ask the question, beryllium, haven't we been here before? And so I will ask that question, And towards the end of this presentation, Beth will give you the answer to that question. So a little bit of pressure on you, Beth. You'll be giving the answer to that question to this group. And we're going to leave you a little bit in suspense from the beginning until Beth gives you that answer. So also wanted to share that once we're done with the presentation, we will take the opportunity to interactively open up our BHSC webpage. We'd like folks to put eyes on it. And I love showing the board members so that you all can appreciate just the leadership we have. And we are 100% volunteers. And it's an impressive group representing academia, government, and industry who truly believe in the safe use of beryllium. So the BHSC board members give generously of their time. I always get inspired by that. So with this group, I will share as a safety professional. I always start meetings with a safety share. So I ask that you buckle your seatbelts, place your seats and tray tables in upright position, and let's have an informative, interesting, and even fun ride with this webinar. And let's hope there's no turbulence. How does that sound, everybody? All right.
Excellent.
So I'm going to go in share mode. And when I share, I won't be able to see when I go in full presentation mode. Beth will be my eyes and ears, if you will, and I'll be advancing the slides. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to hit presentation mode now, I think. Thought I did. Here we go. So, and one more confirmation, you all can see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. So here's the question. Beryllium, haven't we been here before? And again, we'll leave you in a little bit of suspense. And here's our executive leadership team. Chris Dorn, who is so approachable, so passionate about Beryllium. Again, he sends his regards, and Beth and I. So what is beryllium? It was discovered in 1798 by Louis Nicolas Vauquelin. And he's quite interesting historically because he was a French chemist and pharmacist who used barrel samples to isolate beryllium, and he also discovered chromium. Beryllium has a density that is 30% lighter than aluminum. Its stiffness is 50% higher than steel, and we refer to that as the Young's modulus or rigidity. Beryllium has an advantageous thermal conductivity that's comparable to aluminum. And you'll see there are a lot of comparisons between beryllium and aluminum, and that's for a reason in terms of industrial applications. Its coefficient of thermal expansion is half that of aluminum. Its melting point is twice that of aluminum, so aluminum will start melting much sooner than beryllium. And nuclear, this is near and dear to my heart. The past 20 years of my professional career have been involved with nuclear in terms of nuclear reactor technology, weapons programs, nuclear research, and even nuclear waste that has beryllium. But its nuclear properties are tremendous. It's a neutron reflector, a moderator, and a multiplier. And it's the best neutron donor of the elements, yielding 2 slow neutrons for every fast neutron. The acoustic velocity, it's about 2.5 times that of aluminum. As you can see here, aluminum is our reference in terms of showcasing the benefits and properties of beryllium. And it's also quite reflective in the infrared region. So let's pause here for a moment. In many ways, these unique combinations of characteristics make beryllium the perfect engineering material. And we've heard that before with other materials, haven't we? And we'll speak to that later. So I'm going to briefly turn it over to Beth, who will make you see the periodic table in a whole new way. Beth, please.
Yeah, so I'm very sorry. I forced this graphic in because one of my favorite facts around beryllium can be highlighted by this. So some of you may have seen this before. It's the Can I Lick It periodic table. Demonstrates what on the periodic table you probably should or should not put in your mouth. And you can see that beryllium is, you really shouldn't. It's not the worst, as in some of the more please reconsider that ideas. But equally, it's quite dangerous. And the reason that I wanted this slide in is because beryllium wasn't always called beryllium. So one of the more silly facts of beryllium is it used to be called, or once upon a time was called, glossinium. Now, when you think of the word glossinium, you would probably and correctly go to the Greek word glykos, which is the Greek word for sweet. Now, you might be thinking, why would they call it that? And that is because beryllium, I have been told, I cannot tell you firsthand, tastes sweet. So that's probably one of my favorite beryllium facts. I'm sorry, Joseph, I made you do that one, but I'll hand back over to you now.
No, this is so insightful, and I will never look at the periodic table the same way again. It's great. And if you have, I don't know if it's apparent, but we've got this color coding legend here where it's probably fine, not a good idea, you really shouldn't, and please reconsider. So that's great. So beryllium, continuing along here, only 3 countries, the United States, China, and Kazakhstan, currently process beryllium ores and concentrates into beryllium products. Now Chris Dorn, he also mentioned that Japan is considering full development as well. So in the future, maybe Japan will be added in the mix in terms of the processing of beryllium products. But the primary forms of beryllium are a bare beryllium substrate that's usually coated, plated for stability and safety. We've got our alloys and compounds. And the alloys, the 3 most common are your copper beryllium, nickel, and aluminum beryllium alloys. Your compounds, your oxides, fluorides, and intermetallic compounds. And then the third are your metals and beryllium content composites and Materion, and they are a long-standing member of the BHSC. They are the manufacturer of many of these products. And then finally, we call this FLIBE. FLIBE is an acronym of lithium fluoride and beryllium fluoride, FLIBE, and that is a molten salt used in nuclear applications. And we'll talk more about that in some slides. So beryllium has a high reactivity. Because of that, it's not found in elemental form. So when the French chemist, pharmacist had that barrel sample, he had to isolate it again because it's just not found in elemental form. It's an important constituent in gemstones, notably emeralds and aquamarines, where it contributes to the blue-green color. And beryl ore was originally hand cobbled by a product of gemstone mining prior to the advent of the beryllium-bearing ores being mined for their own sake in the 60s and 70s. And bertrandite, it's in Spore Mountain, Utah, where we have the world's largest reserves and ore deposits and richest deposits of beryllium, and that's leased by what used to be called Brush-Wellman, now Materion, and I'll share with you that when given, and this will be evident as we go through this presentation, but the increasing needs and uses of beryllium are such that Greg, our colleague, friend Greg Helt from Materion, he shared that Materion is ready to start extracting beryllium from gemstones if needed to meet the demand. With our supply and with the increasing demand, they would even consider processing gemstones. So if you desire gemstones, some of them may be used for industrial beryllium. And let's admire the various forms here of naturally occurring beryllium. You can see it comes in many colors, shapes, forms. And we list some of these. The aquamarines, Bertrandite is the ore, particularly at Spore Mountain in Utah. We have beryl, emeralds, I believe that's pronounced Goshenite, Heliodor, and Morganite. So it's the 47th most abundant element, and it's we only represent a few of the over 100 minerals. So I'll let you appreciate those, and perhaps some of you have beryllium in a ring or jewelry. So a little bit about the history. It was, as we already mentioned, discovered in the late 18th century, 1798. The unusual combination of properties make it useful in commercial applications, but that wasn't really recognized until the 1920s. So there was a delay between isolating, discovering beryllium, and then appreciating some of those properties. But we show one example here, 1929. U.S. Patent Office, patent number 1,716,943, and it was submitted by Robert Archer and William Fink, Cleveland, Ohio, and it was for an aluminum beryllium alloy and method of treatment. And I don't know, well, I don't mind sharing. I love reading some of these historical documents where it's on thick paper with the typewriter type on it, and this is one such document, and it gives me an appreciation. In 1986, I took typing class in high school. I was probably the last generation that had to take typing, and if I had submitted a patent, it would have been rejected just on the number of errors of using a typewriter and the amount of whiteout I'd have to use to type over my mistakes. But they typed a patent, it got approved, and if others are amateur historians, I recommend you pore over some of these old documents. It's a trove of interesting information. But here you see a patent going back as early as 1929. Continuing with our history and progression of beryllium, so by World War II, we were increasing the applications. We had corrosion, so the corrosion resistance of copper beryllium alloys was discovered and used in marine diesel engines. The metal was also used in high precision gyroscopes for aircraft navigation targeting systems. And while we're showing an aircraft carrier and a sub, we're fast forwarding a little bit in time, but for many of the Navy ships, whether it's aircraft carriers or submarines, they are powered by nuclear reactors, and many of those have beryllium reflectors. So that's another application, since we have these ships here, and of course the advantage of having a nuclear powered ship is that it can operate. It will have enough power for years to operate, as opposed to, for example, diesel fuels, which would require more frequent stops at a port for refueling. So this picture, Idaho National Lab, the Advanced Test Reactor, and by the Cold War, nuclear and reactor weapons were being developed. Government scientists discovered that pure beryllium has the ability to generate, moderate, and reflect neutrons, which led to the use in physics experiments. And here's a caption and black and white photo of early, it's the Advanced Test Reactor, showing the end and side views. So the side view, and then this is the And I worked at the Idaho National Laboratory from 2006 to 2011, and I served as an industrial hygienist, so I know this group will appreciate that. And I spent a lot of contact time around the advanced test reactor, and that is, it's a pressurized water reactor. And because of the beryllium reflector, and you're seeing it here, it's able to operate the reactor, the advanced test reactor, at relatively low temperatures and pressures, which has many advantages. But it's only able to do so because of the, as we say here, the moderating, reflecting properties of that beryllium. And another little bit of interesting history regarding the advanced test reactor, and I certainly encourage you all to access this site and read up on it, but it has a serpentine design such that you can simultaneously perform over a dozen experiments, nuclear reactor experiments, simultaneously. It's tremendous. And the scientist who had the inspiration for the serpentine design for the pressurized water reactor called Advanced Test Reactor, he was at a restaurant, had the inspiration, and before he would lose his thought, he inked it onto a napkin. So the original drawing of the advanced test reactor is on a napkin. So continuing here, during the 50s, the demand for beryllium and beryllium-containing materials grew rapidly. You can see it advanced to space exploration, but also telecommunications, automotive components, plastic mold tooling, and the combination of lightweight. Recall how we in one of the earlier slides, it's 50% more rigid or stiff than steel. It's much lighter than aluminum. It's stronger than aluminum. These are advantageous properties, thus making it the perfect engineering material. So the other thing about flight applications, and this goes back to its nuclear properties, but if you're when countries launch exploratory either satellites or rovers, Mars rovers, or things like that, you have to have a power source to keep it going, and your radioisotopic thermal generators are nuclear powered, and beryllium and the nuclear properties of it are key component there. So a lot of these are have beryllium both for the lightweight strength of the features, but also for beryllium for the power sources. And in this slide, you can see it's lightweight, high modulus, high temperature strength, excellent thermal conductivity. So again, the quote unquote perfect engineering material. So, so today, fast forwarding a little bit to the present, we use it in many industries and applications, telecoms, infrastructure equipment, cell phones, computers. So we talked about the corrosion resistance of beryllium for diesel generators during World War II, but then we also found it to be perfect for laying the cables on the ocean floors for those corrosion resistance, as well as other properties. And you can read more about that from Yamaguchi or really any internet search there. So, and then beryllium containing materials support miniaturization of multiple functions. Your MP3 players, cameras, phones, the properties of beryllium allow them to be miniaturized into these lightweight, compact devices. And in the medical field, the beryllium's properties have enabled advances in laser diagnosis and imaging equipment. And maybe some of you have had the joy of being on the table being analyzed. And Then beryllium materials are used in components of analytical equipment, evaluate blood for diseases such as HIV, offering a high degree of reliability and precision. So even the medical field. And in dentistry, you've got this beryllium metals used in nickel chromium alloys, and that increases castability because of its properties, the advantageous melting point and range, and other properties. However, this is becoming less and less used because we now have a better appreciation of the hazards and risks with beryllium. It's still used in dentistry, but it's becoming less and less common. And then most recently, in the decades of 2010s, 2020s, where we're at, beryllium materials are being considered for large-scale use in upcoming clean energy technologies. So we've got an example of a microreactor here. And I'm excited to share that in May, I will be joining a readiness review team that will visit the Idaho National Lab. That's where the Advanced Test Reactor and nuclear reactors were first developed. But I will be part of a team, readiness review team, for the startup of the first nuclear microreactor. So I intend to present that at a future BHSC meeting. Oh, what happened? Oh, wrong way. I'm an amateur in terms of advancing PowerPoint slides. So beryllium's used at CERN for many applications, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth for a moment because I think, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, but CERN is almost a home away from home for you. But please, Beth.
Thank you. So CERN use beryllium for multiple applications. They have copper beryllium, which is probably the type of beryllium that you will be most familiar with. It's the most common, it's the most day-to-day used, and CERN use it for various day-to-day uses. They also use beryllium for things like X-ray windows, and they are just about to build a new version of the Hadron Collider, the LHC. And in that, they will be using beryllium, so much so that they have built their own beryllium facility, and probably one of the best examples of a beryllium facility that we've seen so far. So that's really good. And then, Joseph, I can hand it back over to you now.
Right. And Beth is actually, and her colleague, Isabel Bahar Alonso, who's also a member of the BHSC and who will be hosting the spring meeting at CERN, they have previously presented, and these are published on ResearchGate, they've given some outstanding presentations on beryllium use at CERN. So if you have access to ResearchGate, please look that up. Beth and Isabel. And then finally, beryllium will be important for fusion reactors. Now, this is a passion of Chris Dorn. So again, he's not here with us today in body. He's with us in spirit. And Chris loves to talk about beryllium and fusion reactors. And Chris has been working on this for decades with colleagues all over the world. So I will direct you to Chris with any questions there. But my organization, the U.S. Department of Energy, does support many of these fusion as well as fission research activities. So we've talked a lot about its use, and we gave examples, and you can break down by mining the Bertrandite ore, primarily at Spore Mountain, that's 90%. Processing, your hydroxides, manufacturing. You've got your oxides, metals, and alloys, those three major categories. And then for the end use, we break it down in this slide by industrial, consumer, automotive, electronics, defense, telecoms, energy, and others. And we do give a nice reference here as well. And And I like this slide, and I've got 2 more slides before I turn it over to Beth, and I'll be able to catch my breath. But where is beryllium used? So we got these sources here. Some pie charts illustrate nicely also the uses and by percentage. And we were able to locate information for the EU as well as for the US, slightly different time periods. But what's interesting is that you can see electronics and telecoms in the EU represent 42%. Next largest groups would be auto components and vehicle electronics for both transport and defense. So those 3 take up the vast majority. And then aerospace components. And, beryllium is in your airplanes, for its strength and lightweight. Energy applications, industrial components, and then metal, molds versus metal. So the categories, the groupings are a little bit, they use different grouping titles for the US versus the EU. It would have been nice if it could be a like for like comparison, but you can still see the percentages are quite similar where, well, for other, that's the largest in the US, but you've got your industrial components, aerospace and defense, also automotive electronics, telecom, consumer electronics, energy, and other. And the energy components is going to be increasing in time. We are, with the nuclear renaissance that the world is undergoing right now and the importance of beryllium in supporting that nuclear renaissance, we'll be seeing energy. I think it's an easy prediction that percentage will increase, but 6% for the US, 8% for EU. So, kind of similar on that one. And then in terms of workers potentially exposed to beryllium, this is a little bit of research we put together for a book chapter. Beth and I are co-authors on or chapter leads, if you will, on this. It's called Chapter 13 of the upcoming Practitioner's Guide to Beryllium Hazard Management, which will be published in April. But it's comparative analysis of international beryllium health and safety programs. And the reason we put together this slide is that it provides essential context. A country or an organization, a company, or in my case, the U.S. Department of Energy, we tailor our beryllium health and safety programs based on the hazards and the risks, right? So, and as safety and health professionals, we all know that. That's just part of how we do business. But I like this because it shows numbers of potentially exposed workers. For OSHA in the United States, there's 62,000 workers in the United 50,000 of those would be in general industry, 11,000 in construction and shipyards. For the Department of Energy, where I work, we have within the U.S. Department of Energy almost as many workers potentially exposed to beryllium as the rest of the U.S. And that gives you an idea of just how much we use beryllium, whether it's nuclear applications, industrial applications, so on and so forth. And in my organization, it's where so this would be a subset of this 56. I'm responsible programmatically of the health and safety of almost 24,000 workers. So let's compare that to Europe. Based on a 2000 reference using the carcinogen exposure database, 67,000 Europeans exposed to beryllium. In the UK, 500 to 1,000 workers based on this source here in 2011. And for Canada, We have great participation by our Canadian colleagues in the BHSC, but also using this CareX database, 3,800 Canadians. So there you go with the history, applications, and exposure. And Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you now, please.
Wonderful, thank you. And Joseph, I will ask you to put the slides on when they're needed. Thank you. So Joseph did the wonderful bit of telling you all about how amazing beryllium is and how important it has been and will be to our industries. And even to us as a human race, it's going to probably become quite essential. So we've heard how good it is. Unfortunately, my task is now to tell you that it also comes as a bit of a double-edged sword. So beryllium can be dangerous, and we'll revisit the word can fairly regularly. But essentially, processing beryllium, anything that creates any kind of disturbance or dust particles or particulates on the surface that can be released into atmosphere, that is something that we would consider to be the more dangerous element. And that's because if it's inhaled, it can, again that word, cause some serious health issues to people. Now, beryllium is classed as a 1B carcinogen in the US and in Europe. However, even on that, the world does not agree, because the International Agency for Research on Cancer and the National Toxicology Programme both put it as a known human carcinogen. So some people say it's presumed, some people say that it's known. Beryllium particles also have a secondary, more insidious way of creating illness, and that's through sensitization, very similar to products like nickel. So the more your body is sensitized, the more you are at risk of developing a reaction when you inhale. Beryllium does enter the lungs, there is a risk of a chronic beryllium disease, which is an incurable illness. It's progressive, and it's very similar to one that we all know very well across the world, which is asbestosis. Just if I can ask you to move on.
Yes. Oh, sorry, okay.
That's quite
yes.
okay. I'll give you this slide, Joe.
Okay. So the riddles of beryllium, a short history of a challenging workplace. I recommend that I recommend that everybody read this article. It's available for free online, and here's the link to it. It was written by Paul Wambach. He's a friend, colleague of mine. Unfortunately, he retired as an industrial hygienist from the U.S. Department of Energy. His career spanned 32 years. He was an absolute authority on beryllium. He was there when the Department of Energy developed its regulation. He, in his early career, talked to the safety and health professionals, the occupational medical physicians, the toxicologists, the epidemiologists from the 50s and 60s who were confounded by the challenges of beryllium. And I love this quote by Paul. Chronic beryllium disease is by far the most interesting and humbling problem I encountered in my 32-year career at the US DOE. By the way, Paul is one of the authors for the section in Patty's Toxicology, and we all know Patty's Toxicology is an authoritative volume on toxicological properties of chemical hazards, beryllium being one of them. He is the author of it, so he is quite the authority. But if he's been humbled by it, let's take a moment and reflect why. This 7-page article, which I encourage you to read, it recounts beryllium's complex history as workplace hazard and the difficult challenges when trying to establish protective programs. In a 1943 bulletin, they stated the U.S. Public Health stated beryllium was non-toxic based on animal toxicology studies. In the mid-1940s, however, you had your first group of young women. There was a cluster of sarcoidosis cases in Salem, Massachusetts, at a phosphorus light tube plant. This diagnosis was later categorized as chronic beryllium disease cases that Beth spoke to on the previous slide. And so back then in the 40s, of course, you didn't have your effective hierarchy of controls. You didn't know that beryllium or other metals that you were grinding, sawing, whatever, had adverse health effects. So there were acute exposures. But when those started to be controlled, we no longer had those acute pneumonia type symptoms. So we were ready to declare victory. And by the 1960s, chronic beryllium disease case finding efforts ceased functioning. We thought because we eliminated these acute cases, we were good to go. But these chronic cases were under the radar, and it was only when we started implementing what's called a beryllium lymphocyte proliferation test, that's when we started seeing the cell-mediated immunological responses that cause sensitization and the full-blown when it progresses to chronic beryllium disease. So that's when we realized, oh my, we have a problem. Beth will talk more about that later. And during the Q&A, if you want to learn more about the lymphocyte proliferation test, we can talk about that. So thank you, Beth. Back to you, please.
No problem. Okay, so I've spoken a little bit about the sort of two main methods, which is into your lungs and through your skin. However, if we look at the graphic, it doesn't actually sit as simply as that, because if it can get onto your clothes or onto your feet, onto your shoes, then you can transfer it to other areas. And again, there are parallels with various other historical hazards that we can draw, and I'll draw your attention to those a little later. But predominantly, like we say, beryllium can get into the body through the skin and through the air, so through the air that we breathe. Joseph?
Okay.
Thank you very much. So when it gets onto your skin, there are three main, we'd say symptoms, but it's actually part of the acute sensitization. So firstly, we would have dermatitis. Now, a little known fact about myself is I used to be a chef. And the way I describe this to people is almost every chef that I know has an allergy or a reaction to tomatoes. And that is because your skin has a natural way of telling you it doesn't like some kind of sensitizers. And so the first time you handle a sensitizer, you might get maybe a little bit of red skin. And the second time, you get a slightly more dramatic version of that. And over time, that reaction becomes more and more extreme. And eventually you end up with a reaction that's so extreme that you physically cannot handle the item that your body is telling you it doesn't want anymore. So that's where we see things like occupational dermatitis become an issue, is where the reaction becomes so extreme that your body says, I don't want this anymore. I've told you more than once, I'm going to make this reaction quite big. We also have something called granulomas, or we can have nodules under the skin. Now, obviously, we think about that on our skin, on our hands, for example, that's not going to be much more than cosmetically damaging. However, it's essentially the beryllium being encapsulated by your skin. So if we think about sensitization being that constant exposure, when we look at these nodules, they are actually a little bit more insidious. And then lastly, beryllium causes delayed wound healing. And it can actually prevent wounds from healing as quickly. And that's both in the acute and the chronic stages. If you could move on, please. Thank you very much. So this is a very lovely graphically accurate picture of a lung that AI brought up for me. But essentially, we have two stages to the disease. We have acute beryllium disease, which consists of things like bronchitis, pulmonary edemas, and chemical pneumonitis. Then we move on to the chronic version, which is obviously has a much higher latency period. And that includes things like pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary fibrosis, hemothorax, and granulomas. Again, I mentioned that granulomas on the skin aren't going to be that challenging. However, if you put granulomas in the lung, you're presented with a much different problem because they could be blocking whole sections of those lungs. And so we used to think that the latency period of beryllium was incredibly long. So it's at 5 to 40 years. It's very similar to asbestos, nickel, things like that. However, because we've developed more of an understanding on things like beryliosis and beryllium sensitization, we now understand that you can become sensitized within 50 days. That's the shortest period that we found. But it can take up to 40 years for you to present any symptoms. So if you've been working with it for 50 days and you haven't started getting any symptoms, you're not out of the woods. Okay, if we move on. Thank you very much. So I've said that handling beryllium on your skin is hazardous. However, there's a super simple way that we can address that, and that is by wearing gloves, by making sure none of our skin comes into contact with solid beryllium. But beryllium dust is much more difficult to handle because once it's airborne, it's very difficult to extract from the air. Beryllium is also an ultrafine particle, and so it's very hard to control, and it's incredibly difficult to anticipate the air currents that beryllium will take. So dust is only a problem if we allow it to travel into one of those pathways. So we'll start thinking a little bit now about how we prevent it from getting into those pathways. So I've said getting it off your skin is relatively straightforward. There are some simple controls to keep it from your breathing zone. We keep it safely stored. Beryllium, if it's allowed to be kept wet or in damp conditions, can oxidize. And if you think of oxidization a little bit like rust on a car, and if you were to rub that, obviously it flakes away very easily. The same with heavy beryllium oxidization, can rub away very easily and become airborne. Beryllium areas should be separate from day-to-day working areas. We use HEPA filtration, so high efficiency particle arresting systems. And we select, provide and maintain PPE and RPE. And I recently saw a webinar saying that if you are at the point where you're using PPE and RPE, people can still get injured. And that's very true. You can still have failures on those. So we would always prioritize the engineering controls. So if you move the slide on, please, Joseph. It brings me nicely onto something that I think probably everybody in our profession has seen, which is the hierarchy of controls. So I did see again recently that we are ignoring elimination as a way of controlling a hazard. However, because we're talking about beryllium, we've already got to the point where there isn't anything that offers the same properties. So we can't eliminate. So then we would look at the substitutions, the engineering controls and administrative controls. Lastly, we'd look at PPE. We're going to have a little look at some of the engineering controls that are suggested. Now, the main one would be local exhaust ventilation. And ideally, if we look at this graphic, we would go total enclosure. So the two beryllium facilities that I've assisted in designing both completely enclose the beryllium aspect. But that's not always possible because it's not a cheap endeavor And if you're only using a very, very small amount of beryllium, it's not very practical for you to build an entire building just for that. So then we look at things like almost full enclosures, partial, dust flow hoods, draft downs, walk-in booths, and then going to the less effective capture hoods and smaller enclosures. Thank you, Joseph. So some of the recommended protective equipment that we would say is essential for working with beryllium, again, dependent on the risk levels you're working to. But as I've said, if you're handling beryllium, the absolute minimum would be gloves. Now, the good news is we actually didn't develop a knowledge around sensitization till quite late, because beryllium damages, or beryllium is damaged rather by your hands, by your skin oils. So those people who are trying to create a really quality product would ensure that all of their staff wore gloves, inadvertently protecting them whilst they thought they were protecting the product. They were also helping us by protecting the staff and the people who were in contact with the beryllium from handling it. Now, obviously, that didn't stop them from getting the airborne exposure, but it definitely would have helped with the skin sensitization. Now, when we look at respiratory protective equipment, we would look at a minimum of an APF, which is an assigned protection factor of 20. However, if you're dealing with high risk areas, we would suggest an APF of 40. With our clothing, we want to make sure that we don't take beryllium home. And again, I'll tell you a story in a little while about why. But we need to protect it from getting onto our clothing. And then lastly, we look at the prevention of spreading beryllium through footwear, because if we think about the largest settled surface in an area, it's going to be the floor. And we find that beryllium particulates are transited very, very often through footwear. Thank you, Joseph. So I said we would talk about it, and especially when I said we don't want to take beryllium home, because we're looking at some very similar materials and we have been here before. So as Joseph said in the second slide, we have the perfect engineering material in beryllium. But as you can see from the graphic, we have also had the perfect building material. And my background, I spent about 8 years in the asbestos industry and about 4 years in the beryllium industry. And I can hand on heart say there is still nothing that offers the same complete in one package set of properties as asbestos does. When we replace asbestos, we have to either engineer more than one solution, or we have to accept that it's not going to be as effective. But there was a problem with asbestos, and I think we all know what that was. It was incredibly dangerous. And so we knew that from an early age, the same as Joseph has stated already. We knew that beryllium was risky from a very early age, but we swept that slightly under the carpet because of the latency, because the acute symptoms didn't match the chronic conditions. So there's these big gaps that we thought, okay, well, asbestos, if we use a lot of it, gives us a cough, but that's okay, we'll get over that cough. And then it was only later down the line that we found out that actually there was a longer term issue. And so what we are passionate about in the BHSC is that we do not repeat this mistake. Now, the BHSC has been working in a relatively cottage industry for many years, since its early inception. However, beryllium is becoming increasingly common in industry, and there is an increased prevalence of the soluble forms for nuclear applications. And not just to that, one of the things that I'm finding in the UK especially is a lot of beryllium items are now coming to the end of their useful life. And because quite a lot of the parts of beryllium are small, under things like IOHS, they don't actually need to be categorized, or they don't need to be noted. And so a lot of waste producers are dealing with beryllium without ever even knowing that they're dealing with beryllium. Now, that's fine if they're dealing with one or two small parts every now and again, but the more prevalent this becomes, the more often they'll be dealing with it and in higher volumes. And we are already starting to see waste facilities pick up on beryllium swabs. So we're seeing it in some areas already. So we need to ensure that we have the same lessons learned, we avoid the same issues that we have been through before with these things. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay, so we asked the question, have we been here before? And Beth answered the question. Now, I need to ask, how are we doing for time? Because I can spend minutes, but I don't want to take up the time allotted for Q&A. So Beth and others, I ask, are we?
10 minutes?
10 minutes to still present. Okay, perfect. Well, on our webpage, the vision and mission statements that you see here, they are taken copy and paste verbatim from our BHSC webpage. And these were also mentioned on the webinar flyer, but we are educational in purpose. We are 100% volunteers, and as Beth stated, we care about workers and not being adversely exposed to beryllium. So now our history, we celebrated our 30-year anniversary. I'm just going to go ahead and whoops, there we go. Just to show the timeline here, two timelines, chronicles the U.S. National Labs and the beryllium safety policies. 1999 was a big year. That's when the U.S. Department of Energy, recognizing that workers were getting sick from beryllium, sensitized and progressed to full-blown chronic beryllium disease, they realized and promulgated the very first U.S. federal regulation. It's 10 CFR 850, titled Chronic Beryllium Disease Prevention Program. And beryllium is one of only two identified hazards within the Department of Energy that has its own standalone regulation. There's beryllium and there's radiation. Interestingly, because of the nuclear applications, where you find beryllium, you commonly find radiation. But there you go. And I will jump over to 2016, which is when 17 years later is when OSHA promulgated its beryllium rule. So DOE recognized, and actually, and this is not typically the case, but for beryllium it was, the Department of Energy, which is a self-regulating agency, promulgated its own beryllium rule well before OSHA. So I think that's a real credit to the U.S. Department of Energy. Unfortunately, there have been folks who have been exposed and have gotten sick. And then we talk about some of our BHSC meetings. We've been very, we're trying to increase our international stature. This is why Beth, Chris, and I were elated to present to you today. But we've had a strong historical presence, having meetings at ITER in France and AWE and other the UK, other places. So the Beryllium Health and Safety Committee, for its 30 years, has done a lot both nationally and internationally. And the BHSC helped influence the content of what it went into the Department of Energy's beryllium rule. And here's our timeline. We were we are formally chartered in Washington, D.C., and established in '95. So we're now 31 years. And some of our highlights. Let's see. We have, and I'll just go ahead for economy of time here, just show it all. But we promote the safe use, exposure risks, exposure monitoring, best work practices, training, mentoring of Beryllium health and safety staff, identify and promote relevant research. I will share with you all that we have individuals and organizations from all over the world reaching out to Beryllium Health and Safety Committee with questions, technical questions, benchmarking questions, so on and so forth, dozens of countries. That's encouraging that, our efforts are being appreciated. And I'm just going to go ahead and show all this. These are published on ResearchGate. So Chris Dorn, I just cannot give him enough praise. He's so generous with his time, and he took the initiative to publish all of our meetings on ResearchGate, and people are reading our publications, whether it's a symposium, executive summary, or minutes, or some of our regular meetings that we hold twice a year. We get hundreds of reads and follow-up questions, and that's again encouraging that people have an appreciation for for the hazards and risks of beryllium, but then also they have an appreciation for the efforts that the Beryllium Health and Safety Committee does. So I encourage you all to access ResearchGate if you have an account, and just type in Beryllium Health and Safety Committee, and you'll get free access to our published information. And again, that was part of Chris's vision. Beth, to you, please.
Thank you. So one of the things that I find most enjoyable, and I will keep this quite brief, is our subcommittees. So these are specialties, and they come with some titans of industry and government organizations that chair these subcommittees. So we have technical practices, sampling and analysis. We have risk communication, research needs, medical and epidemiological, which is one that we lean on heavily quite often. And then a new one, which is FLIBE, which is FLIBE for the Advancement of Fission and Fusion, which I love is called FAF. It's not a FAF, don't worry. If we can just pick out two. So the first one I wanted to discuss, if you move on, thank you, is the risk communication. And that's because those of you who are interested in joining the Beryllium Health and Safety Committee, this is probably one of the best resources that I point people to. So if you want to know something about beryllium, or you want to teach your staff something about beryllium, or maybe you want to give some basic education, there is some incredible resources that come out of the risk communication group, including things like the poster that you see. And if we move on to the next one, we have to highlight the FAF, because it's our newest one. It was created because we had an incredibly large amount of industry interest, and there is very little available research. FLIBE is going to be, in my humble opinion, absolute cornerstone for fusion. And with that comes a whole host of challenges. FLIBE is not a straightforward product to be working with, and we're so proud to be working to ensure that we are creating good initial working practices with some incredible organizations like MIT, government bodies, some brilliant fusion startups, manufacturers, and a whole host of other people. Okay, back over to you, Joe.
Okay, yeah, so the crown jewel of our publications for BHSC, it's a book, Practitioner's Guide to Beryllium Hazard Management. So The first edition was published about 8 years ago, and we are now in the process, in a few months, of publishing the second edition, and we're quite excited. What is the Practitioner's Guide to Beryllium Hazard Management? Well, it fills a gap for beryllium users, practitioners, and there are briefer and more specific data sources available on single topical subject areas, but this is the only up-to-date compilation of information covering virtually all the areas of interest that a beryllium practitioner needs to know. And who are practitioners? Well, the safety and health professionals like us, the workers, the managers, directors, leaders who have to make informed decisions on, do I integrate safety into the design of a facility, which is expensive? And Beth has done some great examples and great work on that. It talks about remediation. What is even a beryllium facility? This speaks to the medical community, the analytical chemistry community, epidemiological, toxicological. It's all packed in there. So very excited about that. And a little bit more on the second edition. There are 15 chapters. We have 3 new chapters: demolition, decommissioning of beryllium facilities. Beth is actually the visionary. She's the chapter lead on this one. That's a new chapter since the first edition. It's a new chapter in the second edition. Beth and I and 8 others from 6 countries created a new chapter, and it's the first publication we're aware of that compares international beryllium health and safety programs. In one of the earlier slides, we talked about the context in terms of why do we need a program? Well, it's based on your exposed populations, and you can see that varies significantly by country. And then, as already addressed, Beth alluded to the FLIBE, which is so exciting. That is for fission and fusion, nuclear renaissance that we are undergoing. That's a dynamic committee. And just so you know, you can join any of these committees if you're interested, and our webpage identifies who those points of contact are. So for our second, we had 58 contributors, reviewers, editors from 6 countries that again, put in their time in this practitioner's guide. We're going to release it, publish it in April of this year, and we'll have both electronic and print editions. And Beth, back to you, please.
Wonderful. So again, I'll keep this super brief because we're slightly over, but very excitingly, we were very lucky to get CERN to agree, or to even offer rather, to host the spring meeting for the Beryllium Health and Safety Committee. Now, if anything we've spoken about today has piqued your interest, or you already work in the beryllium industry and you would like to know more, this is absolutely the place to get that information. There's a very ambitious program of 25 different presentations, and all of them exclusively focusing on beryllium and beryllium health and safety. So it's an incredible resource if you want to learn a little bit more about beryllium. And we haven't had confirmation of where it's going to be, but there will be a tour somewhere in CERN. It's quite likely that it's going to be either the Atlas or the Alice control rooms, which I personally am very excited about. They've not let me go underground yet, so it would be nice to get to the control rooms. Okay.
And there's no registration fee. You can attend either virtually, and we have registration instructions. If you click on this link, actually, you can access the link here. But the price is right. It's all free. Again, that goes with our mission, educate, and you can in-person registration instructions versus virtual. Just click on this link, and And there you go. So we do thank you. And I was told to keep this QR code posted for a few minutes here. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, hopefully while keeping this QR code. Oh, I did not do that well. Let me share again, and I will get the QR code up. And I believe, Beth, we can take questions now, right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely, Joseph. And we have got at least three questions. I think Beth, you already have covered this one, but I mean, rather I would ask once again if you have, the question is from Edison, and the question is, what are some of your favorite resources of beryllium risk management?
So again, we would definitely sit on the engineering controls. If you can build the work area before you introduce the beryllium, that's always better. But I think probably the one that really strikes home with the working force is cleanliness. We all in the BHSC have an aversion to dust because, as I say to quite a lot of people that I train, is our eyes are not calibrated to tell what kind of dust that is going to be. And until we have a Google lens fitted in our eye that can actually microscopically tell us that it's not beryllium dust, we have to assume that all dust is hazardous in a beryllium area. So the most basic is cleanliness. Keep your working area clean.
Wonderful. The second is from Adam, and the question is, what were the exposure concentrations in the case with a 55-day latency period? I'm not sure whether Joseph, would you like to take it, please?
So I know that would typically be from an acute exposure, and there would be sensitization. I don't know off the top of my head the exact case study that established that short latency, that short period. Beth, do you know the case off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I do believe it comes from Tel Aviv, and I do believe it comes from the dental industry. But the exact title, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I would refer folks to Patty's toxicology, and we already mentioned the name Paul Wambach, the industrial hygienist authority who authored that section of the Beryllium section in Patty's toxicology. But that documents the cases, epidemiological and toxicological. So I would refer you to that reference.
Wonderful. Okay. There is another one from Abdul Kadir, and the question is, how does the potency for skin respiratory sensitization compare to the more commonly known chromium?
Did you
Not
want to
sure whether
take that?
Beth. Yeah.
So the reactions are broadly similar, I believe, but obviously it's in the question. So it's much easier to be able to state that chromium we have much more data on chromium because we've been researching it for a much longer time. So I would say it's difficult to establish the potency because the cohort for beryllium has been historically, in epidemiological terms, much smaller. There is some evidence to say that it's broadly as potent.
Yeah, and if I may as well, it's interesting. The question talks about beryllium and chromium. Recall that it was in 1798 the French chemist identified both beryllium and chromium. But beryllium, I know that beryllium has its chemical reactions as well as its cell-mediated immunological responses, and it's that latter case that I'm not sure applies to chromium. The beryllium sensitization can is an allergic. So chromium and beryllium both have that allergic response, but it is different in terms of the immunological cell-mediated responses between beryllium and chromium. I'm pretty sure about that.
Okay, wonderful. I think we will allow one participant, Sam. He has a question. Sam, we allow you to ask your question. I think you should be able to unmute yourself and speak now.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to, please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just wanted to understand, if I got you right from the presentation, you made mention that it can cause skin irritation or sensitivity to your skin, if I got that right.
It can do, yes.
Okay, I wanted to find out, with respect to the exposure, at what size, with respect, let's say the particle, because if I got you right, you mentioned in terms of the activity, if probably you are grinding, you are cutting, or whatever activity that one might be doing with the beryllium. At what particle size such that you can, when it gets in contact with your skin, it will be able to cause skin reaction. I'm trying to juxtapose it with a welding film where, let's say a welder who is actually performing a welding activity where he's grinding or cutting. We get to understand that it is the film that could cause some impact. But when it comes to the particle size in terms of the metal the person might be grinding or cutting, it will rather probably cause, the sparks will rather cause burn to the skin. So
Yeah.
from your presentation, if I could get you clear, I would appreciate if we get to know the particle size that could cause that skin irritation to your body. And then also, how long will it take for it to cause that skin irritation to your body? Thank you.
Okay, so absolutely brilliant question and very timely. I did mention very briefly that beryllium naturally becomes an ultrafine particle, which is hazardous for two reasons. The first reason is because it will stay in the air much longer and it will settle much, much slower, and then it will resuspend much more quickly. But also ultrafine particulate will penetrate through your skin, as you've said. However, and Joseph can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there is a particle size that we can confirm wouldn't cause a reaction. So I think the particle size is irrelevant to the skin reaction, but is very pertinent to how long it stays in your body, for example. So if you have visible beryllium dust and you know it's all large particulate, your response would be to wash it away and it wouldn't penetrate through the skin. However, the more fine the particulate, the more chance there is it will penetrate into that skin under the dermis into your body. And then it's very difficult for your body to actually process and deal with it.
Yeah. What you just described, Beth, is my understanding as well. And for beryllium, as well as other particles, the most penetrating size for airborne inhalation is 0.1 microns. So for inhalation, particle size is more of a concern than for skin sensitization. But what you described, Beth, is my understanding as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Joseph. I think we can take one more before we conclude, and that would be a question from Guillaume. The question is, what is the latest on beryllium LPT testing?
Sure. May I take that, Beth? Or
absolutely.
So the beryllium lymphocyte proliferation test. So beryllium is a carcinogen. It's based on lung cancer risks, associations, and animal testing, but that's not what the LPT does. The beryllium lymphocyte proliferation test, and I've had the opportunity and to tour one of the few beryllium LPT labs in the world. It's in Tennessee, East Tennessee. And that's where you do a test. It's a white blood cell test that determines if you have that immunological response or allergic reaction to an antigen, the antigen actually being beryllium. And what you do is the LPT is a blood draw. So for beryllium workers, you withdraw a blood sample and you isolate the lymphocytes or white blood cells. You put it in a dish. There are actually 12 steps to the process. It's very process and labor intensive and very expensive as well. But you basically isolate the individual's white blood cells. You introduce in a dish the antigen, a beryllium antigen, at different concentrations from the same blood draw. And if there's a proliferation of white blood cells in response to that beryllium antigen, then that's an indication that you're sensitized. So the beryllium LPT test identifies if you have beryllium sensitization. Now, if and there's something called a stimulation index. So if enough of those samples of white blood cells at different concentrations have exceed a certain stimulation index, meaning they are proliferating white blood cells in response to this beryllium antigen, then you're sensitized. And there are three outcomes to the test. There's abnormal, there's borderline sensitization, and there's normal. Abnormal means you're clearly sensitized. Borderline means you may or may not be. And normal means you're not. Now, with a positive beryllium LPT test, the occupational medical director then refers you for additional testing to determine if it's progressed to full-blown chronic beryllium disease. And I will offer that sensitization is asymptomatic. So the only way to identify it and confirm it is through a blood test, the beryllium LPT, because it is asymptomatic. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Thank you very much. There is a request, Joseph, from some of the participants that they were not able to scan the QR code. So would you please put the QR code? Thank you very much, Joseph. I think that will help. Since we have last 2 minutes left, I think we would take no more questions, but we are very happy to invite you.
Yes, I would like to put in one final plug for this upcoming spring meeting, and it's going to be hosted by CERN. Isabel as the host CERN manager, and Beth is helping to coordinate that. If you're able to, especially for our European friends and colleagues on this call, I truly recommend, if you're able to visit in person, take advantage of it. But there's also the virtual attendance option. And obviously, we didn't have a chance to access the BHSC webpage, but please, there are enough, we do encourage you to access the webpage as well for more information. And Beth, do you have anything else to say?
No, beautifully put. Thank you, Joseph. And hopefully we shall see some of you in April in person, if not on a virtual link. Okay,
so with that as a closing thought, I would say that Beryllium reminds us that occupational hygiene is not static. Even hazards that we believe that we understand very well, that demands the continuous learning, adaptation, and as the technology evolves, we have to evolve our knowledge and learning as well. I think I go back to the question that the theme, the title that we put is like, haven't we been here before? But I think we also have to think that, are we applying what we already know consistently and efficiently to make it more precise. On behalf of IOHA, I would like to sincerely thank our speakers, Beth, Joseph, and also the BHSC leadership team who has helped us to have this very knowledge-worthy session today. And I also would like to specially thank all of us who have joined us today to attend this webinar. We appreciate your continued engagement with IOHA and look forward to welcoming you for our future events as well. Let us take the lessons from the past seriously, apply them decisively in the present, and protect the workforce for the future. With that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thank you, stay safe, and see you on to the next one.
And everyone can unbuckle your seatbelts now. You can put your tray tables down and enjoy the flight. Thank you so
Allowed
much.
it yourself. Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.